inspectors' desks. And after working with him, questioning him, and subsequently asking him to take it down, but looking at it from the standpoint of what was his intention, it was not meant to be negative. His intention was to calm down the expectations of the electricians that he was working with. Hey, we're only going to deal with what we need to deal with. So we're going to focus on, what's the issue? Let's not go what if, and get out of hand with thinking that we've opened Pandora's box and that now we're going to have to deal with the entire building all at once and upgrades, particularly on existing buildings, just going way and beyond what is reasonable. That was his thought process with coming up with this. Yet, as we just pointed out, face value, walking into a jurisdiction, coming encountering this person for the first time, not having any history with this person, we're setting the wrong tone. And I think that the majority of people coming in would take this and now would be like, oh crap, what am I getting into? They're going to look at each and every nuance. I'm going to get nitpicked to death in this jurisdiction. That was kind of the mindset coming in. And of course, a lot of that is back to this idea of attitude and what you may bring or what they may bring into the setting. But what I'm getting at is taking a look at what you have in place, what you do, and particularly any signage, any verbiage that you put out in your offices, messages, little memos at the end of your signature block. What kinds of things can that be sending, and being aware, am I sending it in a positive message? Will it be perceived in a negative? And that's kind of back to this idea of what message you send as an inspector when you come out. And it may be all well intended on your part, but until I get to know you, I may not be able to take it that way. I may be looking at it differently. So that's what I'm trying to caution you on. So the book, we're taking this to the other level and saying, what things do I view as your role as an inspector? And the first one, I think, is pretty easy. Ambassador. You represent your jurisdiction or your company. Whether you want to or not, you are the representation of that. And therefore, things which may not be in your job description, your bailiwick, your approving authority, for example, yet I may be judging you or expecting you to have input on it. How many times have you gone out on a job site and the homeowner may all of a sudden, oh, you work for so-and-so? Okay, well, let me complain about this. Let me talk about this. And it's not in your area of responsibility. And you're kind of like, oh, hold on. Yeah, I work for the jurisdiction, but I'm in the inspection department. I'm not in the sanitation department. So when you complain about the garbage trucks waking you up in the morning at 4 o'clock when they come through, that's not something I control. You're spending your time spinning wheels trying to explain things. Well, back to these hierarchy of needs of an individual. If you look at what individuals want beyond the safety, the food, the shelter, the second parts are second levels you come to are getting to this idea of self-importance, self-worth. And I'm not saying ego-driven self-worth. I'm talking about just basic, I am a member of society and I have a role to fill. And if you don't give people that acknowledgement, that recognition, then that need is not being met. And now they find ways to try to get that need met. They may not be thinking about it logically or even consciously, but subconsciously, then they're trying to get that role fulfilled. So they complain, or they may take paths to get them noticed just because they feel that the world's going by or the jurisdiction doesn't care. And here I am, a citizen in this community, and yet nobody is not acknowledging that I exist in this community. So we can take steps to realize that we have a role there to fill. And I'm not saying you're going to solve these people's problems. First off, you may not have the authority to solve it. But second, it may not be within your power at all. But you can acknowledge by listening, by acknowledging they have an issue, that they're there. And so that role of ambassador, don't underplay it, because what's going to happen is I'm going to first judge you and our relationship based on our reactions, our interactions that occur. Second, that's going to lap over for what I think of your company or your department because of my experience with you on an individual basis. And of course, that goes further if you work for a jurisdiction, in that now I judge the whole jurisdiction based on my experience with potentially one person that worked for that jurisdiction, which could be you. So we can see how that can snowball, that can play. And our goal is to not be contributing to a negative expectation, a negative encounter, because the more that I develop this public trust, then the more effective I'm going to be when it comes to doing my job, so that people don't automatically think, up, I suspect he's got some agenda here. He's got an ulterior motive. We're not trying to get into that type of a scenario. So keep that in mind, the ambassador role. The other one we've already talked about is this idea of educator. Whether you like it or not, you are going to be an educator, because think about it. In your role of the authority having jurisdiction, you probably have more knowledge on the specific requirements and what the regulations are than the person you're dealing with. You just are spending more time. You're, in the codes, in the procedures, you understand what the regulations are. You may have more knowledge than the person you're interacting with. So keep that in mind when you get to your roles. The idea of facilitator. Now, this is the enforcement side. And what we're trying to do is not come off as that gatekeeper barrier that people have to get around or through in order to get things accomplished. It is, if you look at your relationship with the people you're regulating, we are facilitating them to get to a point where they can get a safe structure that they can now occupy. It isn't a case of me preventing all ill from happening on a job site. I can't do that physically or by authority. I can't do that. What I'm there is an extra set of eyes and ears. And in the scheme of things, I represent the citizens in my community, not the person doing the work, not the person they're doing the work for. I'm representing the citizens who aren't part of this process. They are looking to the authority having jurisdiction to protect them from the risk that's being introduced to the community by putting the building up. And you're there just to add input based on what the laws and regulations are, which in theory are coming from those citizens, to represent their acceptable level of performance of risk, the minimum acceptable level of performance and risk. And that's your role. That's what you're there for. So I owe a duty to them in general, not to a specific building owner, specific tenant. You see the difference there. You see the semantics of what I'm talking about? So our role is to help the designer, the contractor, the tenant, and the owner get to a point where they've got something that is meeting or performing better than what we expect as that minimum acceptable level of risk in the community. And so if we keep that focus in mind, we realize our role is to be a part of the process, but also to be a facilitator. Now, I don't mean you're a doormat. I keep saying that. By being helpful, by being part of the process, by pointing things out, doesn't mean that all I do is just, oh, well, okay, yeah, hey, all right, do what you want. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that you don't have to feel that the burden of preventing anything bad from ever happening on the job site rests on your shoulders, because it doesn't. I hate to inform you that. It doesn't. Again, when you look at the liability, and that's how we track it from legal standpoints, who's got the liability? Well, first and foremost, person doing the work. Secondarily, who was brought in to do the design on behalf of the owner, the building owner and the tenant. Depending on what we're regulating, when we get into, for example, our property maintenance issues, it may be the tenant, it may be the building owner that are responsible. But the jurisdiction, unless you intentionally violate the duty that is owed, the trust that is owed to the general citizens, unless you violated that, then it generally doesn't reside with the jurisdiction or with you. However, if you're doing jobs you shouldn't be doing, if I am not doing the job that I'm supposed to be doing, if I'm setting up something for causing harm to somebody or causing inconvenience to the standpoint of they have to go back and do something over, and I intentionally intended that, it's called malice, then yes, I may be personally accepting some liabilities, but normally mistakes will happen. And in the performance of my duty, I'm not expected to be perfect. See where I'm going? But this is all part of your role. So if you think of your roles, and that's where the book's focusing on these three aspects, not necessarily the language that you may have, but we're trying to get to this idea of the public trust. If the public knows you're fair, but you're firm, but fair. In fact, that's the best accolade I could give you as an inspector. He's firm, but fair. She's firm, but fair. They are not going to be the doormat. They're not something that we can walk all over. They're not being unreasonable. They're fair. They're consistent. They have a basis for the requirements, and they've at least presented them to me. Whether I am going to accept that or not is another matter, but at least they can explain what the intention of these requirements are, what the benefit is in a sense for me or the community. That's the point. If you can't do that, then you haven't learned enough about those requirements in your job performance that you're going to be really effective, because I need to be able to communicate that to people. So that's my starting points. And again, once I've done that, then now it becomes a trustworthy baseline of competence. All of the publications, statements that my government may put out, my department, my company may put out, all of that means nothing the first time that one of the clients or citizens experiences something different than what those sayings are on a one-on-one basis. So it all comes down to basically me and you. And as I said, that's not saying that I've got to be so overwhelmingly accommodating to the point of I bend over backwards and you can walk all over me. No, I'm not saying that. But the point of I do need to develop a way to communicate, work with you such that you don't feel I've got that agenda, ulterior motive in some fashion. I'm not going to present that, and I'm not going to follow through on that kind of a thing. Hopefully that makes sense to you all, because that's going to be very critical. So we're trying to build this public trust. Of course, the benefits of doing that: increasing the public safety, making our jobs easier, consistency, being fair. Main thing with fairness is realizing that you're not treating people unfairly. I'm being consistent in my applications. I'm not singling out people. And likewise, I'm not granting favors arbitrarily to people. There's justification for what I do. And gaining the public trust is underlying all of these efforts. Now, you can represent a consistency aspect in your verbiage, and be careful. Some of the things that you send out may not appear to be addressing that. So take a look at your policies, procedures, and what language goes out. The idea of professionalism, it's kind of like art. People say, I don't know how to define it, but I know it when I see it. Well, that's really kind of how professionalism goes. The roles and duties vary based on the jurisdiction and what responsibilities you have and what the expectations of the public is, or the citizens that you're regulating is. And we don't want to appear to be offensive. Had a neat example of this, where a gentleman had to meet with a local small community county council to present a proposal. He was a developer, he was a builder. And so he assumed it was going to be televised to the community. And so he assumed, hey, I better dress up. So he wore a suit. And when he walked in, he was the only person in the entire council area that was wearing a suit. And in fact, the local town mayor called him aside afterwards and said, look, don't ever wear a suit in front of us again, because you're just trying to make us look bad. So they had a chip on their shoulder and thought he was this highfalutin, big fancy city lawyer type person coming in trying to tell them what they needed to do in their community. Like they were backwards and ignorant and wouldn't be able to figure that out. So they took offense at that. I think most of us wouldn't take offense if somebody showed up and they were nicely dressed. We would kind of take that as a sign of respect. So once again, keep that in mind when you see those things. And that's what we need to keep in context when we're doing our jobs. Consequently, the other way, if I showed up in a suit and tie and was going to do your footing inspection on your single family home, first thing you know, he ain't getting dirty. He's not going to get down and walk that trench. He's not going to be checking that deeply because he's too dressed up for it, which may send another message altogether in my relationship building with you on the job site. So it's being appropriately dressed, giving the appropriate verbiage, using the appropriate language so that we don't perpetuate any of these stereotypes, that we don't perpetuate any kind of language which says, something different than what we really intend. That's the point. And we need to keep that in the back of our minds. Now, I'm going to give you a little tip here. This is not in the inspector skills book, something I ran into ages ago in kind of a customer service type related class. And it was called the 7-11 rule. And what it says is, in the first 7 seconds you encounter somebody or you encounter a new situation, you make 11 assessments. And those assessments, if you've been a scout, they read kind of like your scouting oath in some fashion. Cleanliness, attractiveness, credibility, knowledgeability, courteousness, confident, professional, all those things. So you make these assessments, and from that you come to one of 3 conclusions. The first one is, I like. Yep, seems all right. Talks the language I like. Didn't do anything to throw me off my game. I think I can trust this person. I like them. Number 2, oh, no, I don't like. They jump out of the truck. First thing they do is they start yelling, you can't do that. That's wrong. There's a violation. Well, hi, I'm John. How are you? No, you can't do that. Everything. Setting the wrong message. I don't like that person. Wait a minute. They're not willing to be, approachable, be fair. They're not a resource for me. So that's my second. Third is equally bad. I get mixed messages. Wow. They kind of scowled at me. They look like they're angry. They don't look approachable. They're not looking me in the eye. And yet when they talk, they sound nice and reasonable. So I don't know what's going on here. Is the look not matching what the expectation or attitude is? Is there some gap here in what I'm seeing? And because I'm not sure, I'm going to be on the fence until you prove me one way or the other. likable, not likable, trustable, not trustable. So in the interim, I don't trust you because I get mixed messages. I share, and I'll go ahead and do that because I'm rambling here. When I became the director of the department, I made an effort to be approachable, so I thought, to my department. And when they ask me, somebody interrupts me, asks me a question, like I'm going someplace, whatever, I wanted to answer all their questions as best I could. And so I would look at them, try to give them a look that said, you've got my undivided attention. And I would answer them as concisely as I could so that they could answer more questions. So we weren't running out of time. And they took that. Who knew that I had evidently what's called resting bitch face? Who knew? So till somebody told me, I didn't realize that my intense look was coming off as, hey, don't bother me. I'm busy. I got more important things to do than talk to you. You're in the way. You're slowing me down. I had no idea I was presenting that look. Second, my short answers. I was doing that to try to answer the question so that they could answer follow-up questions, ask follow-up questions, and again, take advantage of the time that we were taking. Well, they took that as, oh, you're trying to brush me off, get rid of me. Now, it was, again, a brave soul who finally pointed that out to me, which meant now I'm aware that I'm doing that. And what I needed to do was make sure that I didn't give that impression. And that means could be as simple as when somebody stops you as smiling at them, acknowledging them. What do you want, Pancho? What do you want, Frank? No, I meant honestly, openly. And if you stop to think about those things, not just the way you've always done it, you may be surprised at what kind of reactions come about because of that. Back to your attitude, same thing. My approach, my look, how I interact with you may set the tone here from this first impression standpoint to at least now the person is willing to give me the benefit of the doubt when it comes to what may come after that. And that's what all I'm saying is it helps to sway things, just giving you the starting point so that it doesn't come off as I've got to come overcome that hurdle that you don't trust me, or you feel like you can't trust me, or that you don't like me. So how can I get to a point of at least being even keeled, professional? I liked what Chris had texted, I want to be appearing reasonable yet competent. That's what I want to be. That's how I want you to look at me. Reasonable but competent. Firm but fair. Again, we can come up with our own versions of that. So this idea of professionalism, there's specialized expertise that you will have. There's a whole bunch of acronyms we can throw out here for what kinds of attributes we would call professional. And depending on the situation, one or more may apply. This idea of what you may present, but we need to be aware that there's things we do which may overcome that. Now, what's the whole point of this? It is trying to get along from the standpoint of developing a relationship so we can work with each other. That's the secret. Oh, thank God Carla's back. We thought maybe she was out having those Coronas. Yeah, I thought so. So it's being respectful. It is being helpful to the extent you can. I'm not saying be the punch out. Be open-minded about things. Recognize there may be other approaches. In fact, there generally are other approaches. Be fair, be consistent, be empathetic. Now, that's a word. When we look it up, the ability to understand, be sensitive to another person's feeling on a personal level, because you can relate. You've either been there or you can relate to something very equivalent. Quick example. I mentioned about cancer. Any of you all that have been through cancer, you and I have a different relationship than other people who have not, mainly because we can relate to common experiences which we could share, and our communication style recognizes that we both been through it. If you've not been through that or not had a loved one go through it, then your idea and relationship with me is one of being sympathetic, meaning you can understand it on an intellectual basis, but you've never been there. That's a whole nother different level of communication. And I can tell you and start that by just sharing. I was blessed to have all of my inspectors in the different disciplines in my department had been in the field in that area before they came to work for the government. So my building inspectors had all been in the field at some point as a building carpenter, contractor, GC. My electricians had all been licensed electricians, mechanics, so forth, so that everybody had been in the field. And when it came to concerns, butting heads, just presenting bad news, the first things you'd remind them is, remember what it was like when you were on the other side of the fence. Remember how it felt when they come out and gave you bad news. And keep that in mind when you go to talk to them, when you go to share this, when they're going to have to redo something. That approach. And sometimes it's as simple as me saying, you know what? Yeah, I've done something very similar, or I did the exact same thing. And, you know, we just get busy on the job. We may overlook those. And so, you know, it happens. We're going to have to, unfortunately, have you remove this, going to have to redo it. Your stair tread riser geometry is wrong, something like that. It's simple to just express such that rather than nope, that's wrong. You got the stair tread riser geometry backwards. You're going to have to redo them. Yep.
So
call me for a reinspection. I can't come back out for at least a week.
Can I interject for just a minute?
Maybe.
Maybe. We'll see what I say. And then if not,
there we go.
How dare you bring that up?
Yes, go ahead.
I hate to bring this card up because I try not to. But I've found that some of my challenges out in the field is that the guys don't think I have that much experience.
Yeah, you and Jamie, yeah, we're really not believing that you guys don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it feels like every time I go out to a field and I've got a new contractor or whomever new, I have to give them a resume, and it's exhausting. I also, because I look like I'm 20, they don't feel I have a lot of experience either. And I've been doing this for 30 years. So
no.
it's crazy. And I started out as an electrician.
Oh, there you go. Wow.
So yeah, that's part of my problem. I have a huge ego.
Yeah. So, shocking. Yeah.
That's what electricians have. Do you have any like suggestions, like how to help with that? How to help with relating to our contractors, and so that when we are empathetic to their needs, that they understand that we really do have the experience and background to give that empathy.
And I'm going to let, I think Jamie might have some more, perspective than I do. But before I do, I just wanted to point out some of the things, the idea of giving your resume. Discussion points you may need to, and this applies frankly to all of us. If we're new to that person, they don't know us. They don't know what's going on. And so sometimes you got to be careful. You don't want to give so much that it sounds like I'm smarter than you, more experienced than you are. And yet, on the other hand, I want to give you enough so that you feel like, oh, yeah, hey, okay, that's noteworthy. There's a point. Oh, there's another point for her. Yep. Before we get to this idea of, am I going to accept you? And unfortunately, there's always the challenge of, okay, do they really know as much as they think they appear to be conveying to me that they really do know? So those are tough ones. Jamie, you got some?
I would not entertain giving anyone your resume. That's not what you're there for, to provide your resume. What I did do is I know my job and I am excellent at what I do. So when I would make a call and someone would challenge me on the call, I'm fortunate enough that when I was in the field, we had the code books in our cars. And I realize a lot of agencies don't do that. The one thing I can say over my career the last 30 years is that you have access to the internet, right? So I have pulled the code up online. Every single state in the United States has adopted some code of some kind. And every city and county is supposed to have adopted that code. Whether they actually enforce it or not is another story. But, I have been challenged on making codes, and I would just go get the code book and put it on the trunk of my car and say, well, what does that say? Or what does this say? Or no, it has to be this color wire, or, whatever the case may be. I've had two situations in my 30-year career where I had to lock myself in the car because the contractor was getting combative and in my face. And so I just called my boss and said, I'm in the car, I'm locking the door, and I'm driving off, just so you know. And he facilitated a meeting so that the contractor could say his piece. And then when I started to speak, the contractor started doing the same thing to me in front of my boss that he did in the field.
Oh,
And sometimes, it takes situations like that where a male counterpart could call your male contractor out for being disrespectful to you and to what you're needing to do. But don't feed into their fear of what you know or don't know by summarizing your resume. You don't need to do that.
yeah. Yeah. It's
Okay,
just
and
very
I know we got a question. We got some comments from Paul in just a minute, but the only word of caution, and I'm assuming this goes with it, just listening to your scenario, Jamie, I could see where that would put off somebody if you came off as, I'm just going to tell you the code, nothing else, not helpful, not friendly. I'm here to do my job. Take it or deal with the consequences.
Yeah, no, that's not
That's
how it went down. But what
and
I'm saying is
and that's
rely on your
caution.
expertise, right?
Yeah, you
I've
got your
had
expertise.
situations with developers where they put in a spa tub and they didn't have an access panel and they couldn't figure it out. The one thing that I will say, being a female inspector, is, and a female inspector who did not come from the trades, I have a little bit more objectivity, right? Because I don't have a bias because I'm a framer or electrician or a mechanical person. So I actually came up with a design suggestion for them, and they were able to comply, where they did a little cool push panel with the tile. So, I'm just saying, rely and take comfort in your knowledge and study. And, I read the codes all the time. At one time I could cite every code section verbatim, but that was back in the day when you had to memorize the book to get certified.
Right.
You don't have to do that now, but it is good to know what it is that you're enforcing. I'm just saying, don't entertain someone's justification for questioning why you're in the field.
Right.
I would respond to them, well, I was an inspector in Lodi or whatever the case may be, and I'm here now, so let's work on your project and see what we can do to get you moving forward.
So my approach has always been, because I did start from the trades, and then 30 years ago it was hard. I tried to be an electrician 30 years ago, but couldn't get get hired on anything. So then I had to go get a higher education. But the point is that when I have discussions or I have to try to help my contractors deliver a better product, I've been dealing with code since the 93 code edition. And I will go back and tell them the history of the codes and why it is the way it is. And then I never leave them with, you figure it out. I leave them with, well, let's look at this design, because I know design and such. I said, let's look at this design. Let's see how we can find a solution that will meet the code, because this is the intent of the code. And then pull back. It's just that whole struggle of I show up on site and it's like, oh my goodness, and we're not going to listen to you. It takes a while to build that reputation, I know, but
I also struggle with the same things, and I've even had contractors cuss me out over the phone about a certain inspection, about, oh, you don't know what you're doing, or that's not the right inspection, or this and that, whatever. And I'm just like, there's no need. I'm not disrespecting you in any way. There's no need for you to be that to me. So you can call me back when you're in a better mood. And I just, the conversation there, and we move on. And then they realize, oh, it was the right inspection, and this actually helped me instead of not, and so then now they know that I'm on their team. You know what I'm saying? So they respect me a lot more.
And that's something I definitely do when I started in unincorporated Clay County, and I would have some contractors yell at me on the phone, which I'm not used to. So I sit there and go, yeah, I don't accept this type of communication. So we have two options. You can stop and we can continue on, or we can hang up the phone. You can call me in 10 minutes or so.
Yeah.
And I found that to be pretty good. So I don't want to go on to the full beat, but
no, but this is great.
What I was asking.
And this is great discussion again. And this goes beyond just the female in a male dominated profession kind of thing. Just the idea of establishing that rapport, which is back to the confidence level. So that's
what I've said. Yeah. Because I agree. I've seen young guys do it too. I've seen young kids get out on the field and they're getting harassed, not harassed. I hate to use that word, but they get challenged also.
Sure. Challenged all the time. Yeah. And well, anyway, we could go on. Paul, I know you had your hand up. Comment, thoughts?
I was just thinking to myself that a lot of times, and I definitely don't pretend to be or have to go through what a lot of the sisters here have to go through when they go out on the job site. But you would be surprised at what even men have to deal with sometimes when they go out on a job site. This is a money thing. I think it's a money thing. And when they see the inspectors, the first thing they do is they get kind of defensive from the jump street.
Oh, no, here he comes. Oh,
yeah. And one thing I never do, I'm like, I think it was Jamie. I'm never getting into a conversation about what I know about what you know. So,
and before I go there, I think y'all misunderstood what I was trying to say here on that. Is first off, I wasn't trying to say that you're using your experience.
No, this is not anything from what you were saying
as justification, but what I was trying to get to is sometimes in offering solutions, yes, then you say, hey, I've seen these things, or this is what maybe we could do from a design standpoint to get there. And that's where you share your experience. But it isn't like James said, you're not there to try to use it, hey, I'm the guy that's got, more experience than you do. I know the codes. Look at my certification. Do you have one of those? No.
That often comes a lot of times after you've made the suggestion, or you told them that they can't do what they are doing. I came from roadway construction, and believe it or not, being a roadway inspector is a whole lot harder than being a building inspector, because people, they get out in the traffic and they think they can do anything that they want, and it's crazy. But I've worked with young ladies that were, they were more knowledgeable than I was. I learned from them. And at times when they had to deal with contractors that didn't want to respect who they were, they just often just shut the people down until they got their attitude together. Because regardless of what you do, you're the one that's responsible. You have the responsible job. The contractor is just trying to make his money. So, I one thing about it, I respect the young ladies that are on here. And I think that, from what I see of the young ladies, man, y'all do fine jobs out there. And I love working with y'all.
And again, these are, some great comments, great thoughts to keep in mind here, perspectives, approaches. We could spend days, talking about different scenarios, things we've encountered, and how we can counteract it. The main point that I wanted to make was back to this idea of your role having some authority, and yet establishing those bridges and those communication points, and recognizing that, where you are may be different than the person that you're communicating with, and trying to effectively create some level of relationship in the standpoint of being jointly able to get something accomplished. Those that I think we had, again, I forget who, I'd have to look at my cheat sheet. I had been in enforcement from, police departments. There's a style of approach that's used by the police department, and the most latest version is called verbal judo. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but what it does is, judo is the act, it's the gentle art of persuasion, and it is trying to redirect somebody's efforts such that you get them to work with you in going toward a compliance method. So it's not a force on force type headbutting. It's a more taking the force that's coming and now trying to use that force and see if we can we channel it into, how can I help you to get to the compliance method that we need, versus the it's my way or the highway kind of an approach. And it's not as simple as saying it will never reach a this is the way it has to be kind of thing, because we know ultimately that may end up being the point. But what I'm getting at is, that's not the first thing I pull out of my pocket and say, oh, by the way, you're not complying. Boom, here's your stop work. Well, if I've done that, crap, I've lost them. We'll never have any kind of relationship down the road. And that's what I'm trying to do. Something salvageable, something manageable, something gets us to that end point. So there's a lot of things here, and these are great discussions. This is exactly what I wanted to pick up. I wanted to, illustrate here. Let me just finish out these so we can get into some of our technical comments here. It's almost lunch. So some other barriers deal with this unintentionally creating one by what we say, how we say it, actions on the job site. And y'all brought up, some of those things that y'all have encountered. And once again, we may see this, and some seem like jokes to, get into the idea, wow, somebody really said that? Are you kidding me? But yet, yeah, they may be things that we're doing that we're not conscious of. Back to that resting bitch face thing. You want to make sure that somebody valid gives you that input such that you can now take a corrective action. So I can counteract that. So I can offset that in some fashion. But it all gets back to this communication. Now, here's just a quick example. The author of the book got a shopping list from his wife. And here's the shopping list. So we all know what he needs. So we think, well, Steve, being the dutiful husband, said, okay, well, hamburger. Yep, I know what to get on hamburger, although she didn't say how much, but he made some choice. But then he came down to, he's got tapioca and he's got, we're assuming, whipped cream here, right? So he goes to the store and he sees, oh, there's a variety of shapes, sizes, different types. So does he buy one of each? Well, if you knew Steve, you'd realize, yes, he bought one of each to make sure that Marcy was happy. So missed on the communication of exactly what was needed. So that may happen when we're dealing with people. They may not understand exactly what it is. They know generally what you're talking about. Or likewise, tapioca, different forms of tapioca, different boxes. So do I expect you to use them all? No. Was I looking for one versus another? Yeah, maybe. But once again, it's the communications part. When we get into different forms of communications, one of the most critical things that we miss when we're not dealing with a interactive type where there's visual communications and cues. That's why, those of y'all without your cameras on, it's very hard for me as an instructor to know, am I reaching what you want from me? That feedback loop that I'm expecting, because I don't see you. I don't know. Those that raise their hand, bring forward a question, put something in the chat. Yeah, I appreciate that. And that gives me some feedback. But I'm looking for nonverbal communications, which is roughly, some guesstimations, some studies, 55% of a message comes across just from visual cues, seeing your body language, seeing your facial expressions, seeing your response to the spoken words. And 38% of the message is usually tracked to tone of voice. And think about it. Is it spoken calmly, rationally, or is it spoken harshly and hardly and loudly? What message am I sending to you? So when it comes down to that, what's left? Well, the remaining percentage, 7% or so, we're talking just the words that I use, the verbiage that I use. Well, that's not much. That doesn't give you a lot of leeway. And I can't put my emotions in the words necessarily. So therefore, you're reading it and you're going to filter in your mood or your expectations of me back to what interactions have we had? Well, last time I talked to her, she seemed pretty angry, pretty pissed off. So when I get the message from you, just written words, I'm filtering it with, oh, she must still be mad at me, when that may not be the case at all. And I don't have a way to counteract that with most of my word choices. And so it's taking into account that these are things you have to account for when you're trying to do the effective communication. So that communications model, the most important thing to keep in mind is if you send a message to somebody who is going to receive it, you need to have a feedback loop, which is going to tell me, are you getting the message? Are you nodding your head? Are you nodding your head? Are you giving me some cues or holding up other digits, which I won't display? What message are you sending me? So these are all critical things, and we need that feedback loop. So when, as some tools, for example, we may have a discussion on a job site face-to-face, and we talk about what needs to happen. Remember my documentation tool. I need to document what we discussed about. And so I may use an email or a text format to send that summarization of what that discussion is. It does several things. Number one, it provides me the documentation that I may need down the road should I ever have to take this to a higher level, take it to my supervisor, or God forbid, go to a board of appeals or even to a court case. It gives me that documentation of, here's my recollection of what was said. Here's my summary. And hopefully you also get that feedback from the receiver of the message as to what their interpretation of that is. And if there's differences, now we've got further room for communication. So that's what I'm trying to leave you with here, is just pointing out that communications model and how critical that is, and how that may hurt you or hinder you when we're not dealing with the visual cues or the face-to-face communication, so to speak, job sites, but doing it remotely, virtually. And if all I have is just the word choices, you may parrot back the words that I gave you without really understanding what those words are. And that then leads to problems down the road. So keep that in mind. Keep choosing the right message and path. Don't hold those face-to-face communications when it's negative, hostile, harsh in front of others where there's an embarrassment in. I don't point out that it's wrong and yell at you from across the job site. Oh yeah, you're going to have to redo all that stuff you did. Yeah, hey, have a nice day. Yeah, do it in a format where at least you can feel I treated you with respect. How would you expect to receive it? How would you want to receive that message? It ain't good, but yet how am I going to expect you to communicate that to me? Those are the things that we need to look at. The receiver's preference, those kind of ideas. There's 4 truisms, and I know I'm going a little past the hour. Please forgive me. 4 truisms of communications. Number 1, it's unavoidable. You got to have it. You can't be doing your job without communicating. So you got to communicate. Number 2, Once it's said, once it's out there, can't take it back. I may ask, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, ignore that. Ignore that. Yet, are you? No, you're going to remember it. So number 3, it has a memory. One of the things that always got me about growing up in the South, which, by the way, my accent comes back when I visit my relatives. And so those of y'all in the South who are going, you don't sound like a Southerner. Yeah, it comes back. But anyway, taking that for what it's worth. One of the things that always killed me was that little phrase at the end, bless their little old heart, which is just a way of insulting somebody and getting away with it. That Edwin, he's a nice guy, but you know, sometimes he doesn't think too straight. Bless his little old heart. As if somehow that's going to make it all good, make it all fine. Well, the truth is, I remember that. You called me an idiot. John's an idiot. Bless his little old heart. Yeah, I remember that. And yeah, you tried to pass it off as a joke, but I keep thinking, was there some underlying message? So that's the point I'm trying to get to is, and number 4, the most important thing is you should be prepared for communication and responses from the person that you're dealing with. If you're giving them bad news, they're not going to be happy. And as y'all pointed out, they may come back at you. And in fact, they may make a personal attack on you as if you're incompetent and it's your fault when it isn't. Now that's probably a knee-jerk reaction, which isn't really truly trying to attack you from the standpoint of they know that they're wrong. They know that it isn't your fault, but their knee-jerk reaction may be, you know, how do I respond to this? Oh, I don't know what to do. And so I lash out. So we have to separate ourselves from that and recognize that we may get these things. And so be prepared for it and try to come up with phrases. Susanna talked about how she may need to, when somebody's treating her unfairly, inaccurately, or crudely, rudely, how you separate from that. We're obviously not making a difference in convincing each other about this very issue. Let's revisit it. Let's come back to this. And we may even get to a point of, look, maybe let's get together and you bring your designer, I'll bring in my supervisor, and we can start hashing this stuff out. So at least figure out a way to stock phrase or approach which helps you to disengage from that and maintain or at least keep the lines of communication so that it doesn't appear as if, look, talk to the hand, I'm done with you kind of thing, because that shuts down future relationships. So be prepared for it, but take into account it may not go the way you think. And I had a specific case where, and this is just another resource that we're throwing out here. We have a course on report writing, which is to help you with the grammatical skill levels so that you don't at least come off as appearing illiterate like I was talking about. So it's a very good way to do it. I'll skip these in the interest of time. What I wanted to get to was this idea. Oh, shoot. It's too far back down in here. All right. Ignore this. I'm gonna stop sharing on that because it's just too distracting. There was more that I wanted to get to, but back to this idea of we need to keep in mind that it may not go the way you think. I had a HR policy come down which impacted a particular inspector, and he was one that had a lot of emotional issues going on. And so I suspected, which turned out to be the case, that he was going to be upset by this policy. So I thought I'd done my diligence and prepared myself for what responses he may give me to that new policy. What happened is I wasn't prepared for the fact he made it a personal attack on me. And he attacked my integrity, accusing me of having created this policy, which came from HR, not me. But anyway, personally, just to focus on him and address some issues that he had. And he thought, and that was his approach. And I was not prepared for that. So what happened is I escalated that conversation. I personally argued. I raised my voice. I did all the things you're not supposed to do. And I, as a supervisor, was going in and I said, well, I'll show you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to escalate this to the point where I can now hit you with insubordination and give you 2 days off without pay. And the scary part was that's exactly what happened. Now, I had to look at this after the fact rationally, and I came to the understanding the person that failed was me. Yes, that person spoke initially knee-jerk, attacked me, which wasn't right as a supervisor, but when I talked to him afterwards, when I talked to him about, the improvement plan type thing, I realized the issue wasn't me, it wasn't the policy, it was all the other things that he had, the baggage that was coming into the job, health issues with his wife, with family members. There was so much going on in this man's life, and this was the last straw. He snapped. And it really had nothing to do with me. And in reality, it had nothing to do with the policy that was going into effect. And I had to be honest with myself, and I had to apologize to him because I was the one who took it to that level, took it to that next level. I had failed as the supervisor. But back to, I'm just underlying that point of be prepared. It may not go the way that you think it's going to go. So, Jamie, quick one. Yes.
Hey, I really like that point, and I think someone said earlier, we all have to understand it's all about money, right?
Sure.
Truly, it's all about money. So one of the things that in training, like my current coworker, I've always told her, you just can't take it personally.
No.
It's not personal. It's
Right.
always something else. And we are all not going to know everything, but you have to exhibit a little bit of confidence because otherwise certain contractors would eat you alive in the field, right? And it's okay to say, I don't have the answer to your question right now, but I will get back to it.
And then what do?
I always follow up.
For God's sakes.
I follow up in writing. This is what I'm going to look into for you. I will have it for you by end of day tomorrow or whatever the case may be. And then another good tool that I've used over the years is, and it served really well, is when I got my business degree, one of the things that I learned is that if you exhibit an interest in people, and John, your story kind of reminded me of this, is that if you exhibit an interest in the people that you're working with in the field, and this is one of the reasons why I was as successful in my NASA job, when my boss got removed, I actually went to work for the contractor building the project because I had the ability to establish a relationship. I didn't walk in there with a chip on my shoulder. I was always trying to find a resolution to their issue, right? But I would get up and go, hi, how are you today?
Right.
Are there any challenges that you're running with today that we need to look at before we get into going into your inspections? And I kind of tried to guide how the inspection was going to go, as opposed to letting someone else dictate how my day was going to be, if that is helpful to anybody.
Right. And key points there illustrating what we talked about earlier. The whole idea of establishing a relationship starts with just acknowledgement. Simple acknowledgement, checking in, saying hello, saying your name if I know it, not just starting into, okay, what do we need to do next? All right, let's go look at the work. Sending the wrong message, sending a different message at that point. And again, it's establishing those ties. So we've covered an awful lot of great ground. I appreciate the comments, stories, and things that we've brought forward. We are at the time where I do need to give y'all a break for lunch, and we normally would take a full hour. I have managed to use 10 minutes worth of that hour. Is it possible? Is anybody going to need to have that extra 10 minutes, or can we just make it a 50-minute lunch? Can somebody, if you can't do 50 minutes, please let me know.
50 minutes is fine.
I'm good
Seeing
with
50 from most. Okay, not seeing any that say no.
I'm good with that.
Silence implies consent. So just like the code hearings, we're going to say, hey, come back in 50 minutes. So that will be on the hour. And please come back. Look forward to seeing you all. And we're going to start into, again, more of the technical content now. But this was great. And I hope that this helps y'all just either solidify what you're already doing or at least get you to the point of going and, checking in with how you can set yourself up. Jason brought up a really good point. You don't have to click out of Zoom. You can leave it on. Those with cameras, you can turn them off, put the silence on, but we'll just reconvene here on the hour. Please come back,
Bless your
y'all.
heart. We're going to lunch now.
Going to lunch.
Bless your heart.
Not coming back. Bless your little old heart there, Edwin. Yes, sir. Got it. Go enjoy. Please come back, y'all.